Stanford University.
Welcome then to lecture 14 of CS193P for fall of 2013 and 14. Today I'm going to talk about a little bit of miscellaneous topics, UI application and network activity indicator, and then I'm going to follow up a little bit on the demo we did last time. Then I'm going to continue that demo, and we're going to take Photomania that we built last week, and we're going to make it work on the iPad, and we're going to add a popover segue to it, because I talked about popovers a couple weeks ago, but I never showed you how to do it. And you know, all this stuff, if I just tell you about it, it's really not real probably for you until I show you how to do it. So we'll do a popover. And then we're going to dive into maps. So I'll be doing the lecture today on maps. Hopefully I'll get all the way through it. And then on Wednesday I will do a demo with the maps. And also then on Wednesday I will demo some more segues, especially the embed segue. Okay, so that's what we're talking about today. So let's talk about a couple of miscellaneous topics. So UI application is my first one. What is UI application? Sounds important. It's not really that important. We dive right into using the application delegate last week, where we did things like application did finish launching with options, and handling background URLs coming in and background fetching and all that. That was all in the applications delegate. So the applications delegate is actually set by a property on another object called UI application. So UI application, this class, it only has one instance in your entire application. You get it by calling this UI application shared application. And there's really not a lot of really interesting stuff in this thing. You can go check out the documentation, but all the real stuff is in the applications delegate. All right, so it has a property on your application called delegate. That gets automatically set for you. And then your application delegate object, which we did a lot in last Wednesday, that's where all the action is. Okay, so you can check out UI application if you want. I did want to point out one particular property on UI application, however, which is the network activity indicator visible property. This is a Boolean property. If you set it to yes, then the little spinner that shows up on the status bar, have you ever seen that when you're doing network stuff? There's a little kind of spinner that's spinning. That turns that on when your application is the active application. And this thing, it's Boolean, yes or no. That spinner's either on or it's off. It's totally your responsibility to turn this thing on and off. It's a little bit difficult to deal with because A, it's global. It's an UI application. So all the threads in your application are all using this same spinner. And number two, it's a Boolean. It's not like a push and pop or a count. And so imagine that you fire off a big flicker fetch that's going to take 10 seconds. And you start this network activity indicator, turn it to yes. Then in another thread, you fire off a little flicker fetch. It's only going to take 1 second. Okay? So it fires off, it turns this on. 1 second goes on, it finishes, it turns it back off. Now it's off, but the 10-second one is still running. Okay? So that's bad. So it's totally up to you, unfortunately, to put mechanism in your app for dealing with that unfortunate simplicity of API. I'm sure, I don't know, but I'm guessing that Apple tried to put more complicated API on top of this, and it just didn't work for all different kinds of ways people are doing network activity in different threads. So they just kind of said, okay, we'll give you this and we'll leave it to you. But you should turn this on. I'm not sure if Apple would reject an application submitted to the App Store that didn't turn this on and did do network activity, but they might. Okay, and they'd probably be within their rights of doing it. Why do we have this thing? Because a lot of users might be on cellular, and they only have 300 megabytes a month or something, and they want to know when apps are using that up, right? So they want to see that little thing spinning. So that's why it's important to turn this thing on. Only when you're doing network activity. This is not a spinner for please wait. Okay, your app, first of all, it should never be doing please wait. As we know, we do everything off the main thread. But this is just to tell them network activity is happening even in the background in my app. Question back there.
Is there a reason why iOS kind of detects when you do network activity and turn it on its own?
Yeah, so the question is, can't iOS know that I'm doing network activity in my app and turn it on for me? And the answer is, I'll bet it could figure it out most of the time. Okay, but not 100% of the time. Because when you do a network activity, you fire something off, maybe you're doing that URL session, things like that. I think if you do the URL session where it's actually being happening in another thread, I bet they do turn it on, or they might. I really don't know what they do. But I think the bottom line is they can't reliably 100% do it, so they're asking you, you can do it here. So that's the best of my knowledge, that's the answer. Okay, so that was just a little aside. So now a little follow-up on our demo that we did last Wednesday. Two things that I want to clarify, and that I did clarify if you downloaded the posted code and read the comments. One is, as I was going through my demo, sometimes I forget things, and I did forget this one line of code, which is you have to send a message if you want to get these background fetches to happen to your shared application, your shared UI application called set minimum background fetch interval. Okay, so that interval is an NS time interval. It's the number of seconds that is the minimum between the times that iOS will send you the opportunity to do a background fetch, right? So you're in the background, remember, the iOS can send you a thing that says, hey, wake up, you can do a background fetch if you want. And this says the minimum. Now, this minimum, you can't set it to 1 second, and it's going to wake you up every second because there's a UI application background fetch interval minimum. And that's the minimum you can set it to. And so if you want to set it to that, then you'll get woken up as much as the system is willing to wake you up. Remember, that's only the minimum. It could take much longer to wake you up, depending on what's happening. One thing about these background fetches, the system's quite smart about when it wakes you up to do a background fetch, it's probably waking a whole bunch of other apps that want background fetches too, and doing it all at one time, because all of this multitasking in iOS is all about saving the battery. Okay? Why, you might ask, can't I have 4 apps on the screen at the same time? Well, that'd be a lot of processor, a lot of network activity, a lot of battery drain. Okay? And so when an application's in the background and it's not running, we want minimum battery drain going on. So if it's going to wake, and a lot of the battery drain is not necessarily what your app is doing, but it's just the fact that the phone or the iPad is awake, right? It's up and running. Its OS is running. So mostly the phone and the iPad are sleeping when you're not using it. Okay, so you want it to stay that way. So if you are going to wake it up from sleep and start using battery, you want to get as many apps going with their background fetches and all at once. Plus, there's a lot of very battery intensive things like the radio antennas, okay, the Wi-Fi and the cellular. Those things use power. And so if you're going to do a background fetch, you're probably going to fire up the Wi-Fi. That's going to use power. We better get everybody who wants to do a background fetch doing it all at once. So this is just a minimum. Now, the reason I'm mentioning this is because the default is UI background fetch, application background fetch interval never, which means you'll never get background fetched. So you definitely need to call this. It also, notice, means you have to run your application at least once. Your user has to run your application at least once, and this gets called if you want background fetching to happen, right? Once you've called this, the system knows you want to do that. You know, it's going to, once you go to the background, then after that, the launch, then it will not only wake you up, but if you were to exit or crash, it'll fire you back up once it kind of gets you into the background fetch world. Users might find that they don't like your application running in the background because you use a lot of resources, and their battery gets drained when they let you fetch in the background because you're a bad background citizen, maybe. They can actually go into settings and turn you off when it comes to background. Okay, there's actually a switch that says, don't let Photomania or Shutterbug fetch in the background. Don't do it. And if you set that off, then you won't be able to do it. And you can find out if the user has done that using this property in UI application called background refresh status. And it will return the refresh status. It actually has 3 different states. 1 can be you're good to go. 2 can be the user turned you off. 3rd can be restricted. What restricted means, and you're going to see this in various things. We'll see this with the map stuff. Restricted means you can't do it, it's off, but your user didn't turn it off, and they can't turn it back on. Okay? Because they're restricted in some way. How would this happen? Parental controls, for example. It's possible in parental controls to make it so that this app is not allowed to run in background mode in parental controls. Okay? Corporate environment. A corporation might not want to allow a certain app to run in the background because of what it fetches or whatever. Okay? So you got to check all 3 of those states. And if it's in that restricted state, not just this thing, but anything that's in a restricted state like that, you don't want to say to the user, I want to do background fetches, but you haven't turned me on, because then they won't be able to go turn you on, and they'll be like, what? Okay, they'll be confused. So I just want to make this a good opportunity to talk about those 3 states, right? Okay, it's on, it got turned off for the user, and it's restricted. I mean, it can't be turned on. Question?
What if I want to do something in the background, but I don't want to do a fetch?
So the question is, what if I want to do something in the background, but not a fetch? And the answer is you can do that. This background fetch mechanism doesn't mean you can only fetch on the network. You can do other things. But it's called background fetch and all that, I think, for a reason by Apple, is that they're kind of implying this is kind of what we imagine you're doing with this. So they don't really want you to wake up and then just use a lot of resources somehow doing something else. But you are allowed to do something else. So there's no law that says when the background fetch is called you couldn't make some mathematical calculation or something like that. As you can imagine, what really would you be calculating mathematically? You kind of, when you wake up in the background, it's kind of like you want to check what's going on in the world. Okay? And we're going to talk about checking things like where am I in the world? That's a different thing. There's another mechanism for that. We're going to talk about that. Yeah. Question?
Is this like what, let's say, like Facebook or Snapchat uses to know that like someone sent you an email or whatever?
So the question is this what, you know, Facebook or some social media app that you know, people are sending you messages, is this what it's using to say someone sent you a message? Yeah, the little notification line. And the answer is no. This is not what it's doing. There's another mechanism for that called push notifications, which we're probably not going to get to talk about, unfortunately. So that's how they're doing it. There is a way to basically have a user of an app sign up and say, with the server somewhere, saying, hey, I'm willing to accept push notifications from Facebook. And then the Facebook server can send notifications, little tiny JSON packets, basically, to the phone saying, oh, here's a message or something like that. And the message might be, this guy's got a message. When you get those, there's a way to get woken up in the background. So it's a different mechanism for waking up in the background. However, if you're doing something, let's say you're in Reddit or even Facebook, and you have your little page up the last time you were in Facebook, and you want that to update. No one's sending you a message, per se, like not a Facebook messaging thing, but it's just like people are posting on their wall, you're watching, or whatever is going on. And you want that to, when you go to the app switcher, you want to see kind of what's happening there. Not in real time, but kind of, you know, that's what this would be great for. So wake up in the background, fetch the current contents of the page, update it. Now if someone looks in the app switcher, they can quickly see, oh, I've got new stuff there. And then they can go click and look. You see? So it's different kind of things. But the sending a message, a notification, that's push notifications, which we're not going to talk about. Good question, though. OK, one other follow-up from that demo is I kind of used a little demoware in that when we got the background fetch, when we got a chance to do a background fetch, I called start flicker fetch, okay, just to make it a one-liner there. That was almost a conceptual thing I was doing just to kind of say, okay, we can have a chance to a fetch, let's do it. But actually calling start flicker fetch there would not be good and probably would not work. Okay, and why was that? That's because start flicker fetch starts a background session URL session. Okay, background session meaning it's the kind of URL session that if the URL comes back and you're not running, you get a chance to handle it, right? That whole handle URL background session, other one we looked at. Those kind of background session URL fetches are discretionary, okay? Meaning that the system can decide, if you're in the background, I'm not even going to do that fetch. So those are fetches that generally you issue them in the foreground, they might complete in the background, okay? When you get a chance to fetch, okay, because of this fetch thing, you want to do that fetch right there using an ephemeral session like we did everywhere else in Shutterbug and stuff. Ephemeral, normal session, not a background session. That way it won't be discretionary and it will actually do the fetch. And since the system is saying by sending you this message, okay, it's your turn to do a fetch. I fired up all the radios. I'm ready to do some network activity. Go ahead and do it. So the code that I posted after lecture last time is doing the right thing. It's doing actual fetch. So you can go take a look at the background fetch message that gets sent by iOS, and you'll see that I'm doing an actual ephemeral fetch. I'm not calling start flicker fetch. I just want to make it clear why that code was different there. Question?
So in the case we want to like update a UI